I've spent 23 years studying one question. Why do people who do everything I'll end up on my table? Not the smokers, not the couch sitters, not the fast food crowd. The disciplined ones, the careful ones. The ones with the sodium spreadsheets and the worn-down walking shoes and the medication organizer filled every Sunday night. The ones who did everything their doctor told them to do, and still ended up in a cardiologist's office at 71. Third prescription. Problem they couldn't explain. I'm a cardiovascular researcher. 2 decades inside the medical literature. Not treating patients but asking the harder question. Why aren't the treatments working? Why does the blood panel improve while the patient deteriorates? Why has the gap between what we tell people and what actually protects their heart been widening for 50 years? I started this channel because the answer I kept finding wasn't complicated. It just never made it into the room. Richard is 71, retired school administrator, Phoenix. 3 miles every morning, home-cooked meals, statin every day, saw his doctor every 6 months, tracked his blood work like some men track sports scores. 11 years of model patient behavior. His cardiologist used the word exemplary. 8 weeks later, imaging. Measurable plaque progression in his left anterior descending artery. The widowmaker. The one no cardiologist says casually. LDL controlled, blood pressure stable, lifestyle flawless by every clinical measure. They added a medication, adjusted another. Nobody in that room asked Richard one question. What oil do you cook with? The answer was a large bottle of canola oil. Bought in bulk for 11 years. Heart-healthy claim on the front. Endorsed by 3 separate health authorities. Sitting on his kitchen counter the entire time. Not as a minor variable, as one of the most consistent, measurable drivers of the exact arterial inflammation showing up in his imaging. Here's what you need to understand before we go further. Richard is not unusual. Richard is the pattern. I've tracked it across hundreds of studies, across decades of research, across the gap between what the science shows and what reaches the kitchen of a 71-year-old man trying his absolute best. The oil industry has known about the inflammatory properties of refined seed oils longer than most people realize. The research has been available in journals, in meta-analyses, in data from studies whose full results were never published for years. And somewhere between that research and the 15-minute appointment and the label on the yellow bottle, the information disappeared. That disappearance has a cost, measured in second cardiac events, third prescriptions, parking lot conversations where someone turns to their spouse and says words that should never have to be said. I did everything they told me to do. Today that changes. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what the most common cooking oil in the American and British kitchen is doing. Inside your arteries after 60. Not the headline, the actual biological sequence from bottle to bloodstream to arterial wall. And you'll have a precise practical protocol you can start tonight. No prescriptions, no supplements, no equipment. Just the information that should have been in the room with Richard. Stay through all 5 things I'm about to show you. Because number 3 is the one that changes how you'll look at your stove for the rest of your life. And number 5 involves a name you'll recognize immediately. A product that may be in your kitchen right now. Endorsed by organizations you've trusted for decades. The truth about it is genuinely uncomfortable. We start now. My name is Dr. Savannah Blaire. This channel exists for one reason. To take what the research actually says, the studies, the clinical data, the findings buried in journals most people will never read, and translate it into plain language for adults over 60 who deserve to understand what's happening inside their own bodies. I'm not here to scare you. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here because somewhere between the laboratory and the 15-minute appointment, the most important information gets lost. Every single time. What I'm about to share doesn't come from opinion, not from trends, not from wellness culture, not from anything on the back of a food package. It comes from decades of peer-reviewed research on cardiovascular inflammation, arterial aging, and the specific way the body over 60 responds to compounds most Americans consume multiple times a day without a second thought. And the truth most doctors simply don't have time to say loud in that appointment room. The oil quietly doing the most damage to your heart after 60 is not butter, not lard, not anything our grandparents would have recognized as dangerous. It's the ones marketed to you as the safe choice. Stay with me. What I'm about to walk you through will change how you look at your kitchen and your cardiovascular health for good. After 60, some of the most common cooking oils in the American and British kitchen are not protecting your heart. They are slowly, silently, measurably destroying it. Now I want to be precise, this isn't about blame. The doctors who told you to switch from butter to vegetable oil in the 80s and 90s weren't lying. They were working with the best information available. The food manufacturers who stamped heart healthy on those bottles believed the science was settled. It wasn't settled, it was wrong. And the people who paid the price were the patients, people exactly like you. Here's what the updated research now shows with uncomfortable clarity. The oils dominating most Western kitchens, canola, soybean, sunflower, corn, are not neutral inside the human body after 60. They are actively inflammatory. And inflammation, as we now understand, is not a side effect of cardiovascular disease. It is the engine of it. Today I'm walking you through 5 things you need to know about what these oils are doing inside your arteries right now. The mechanism, why your body after 60 is dramatically more vulnerable than it was at 40, and exactly what to do instead. Stay through all 5, because number 3 stops most people cold when they finally understand it. And number 5 is the one almost nobody talks about until they're already sitting across from a cardiologist. Before the 5, you need one concept. Without it, everything I'm about to show you feels like isolated facts. Interesting maybe, but disconnected. And disconnected facts don't change behavior. A mental model does. I call it the inflammatory threshold shift. Here's what it means. At 35, your body had enormous capacity to absorb damage and recover. Cells replacing efficiently, antioxidant systems at full strength, liver processing toxins quickly, blood vessel elastic and resilient. You could eat imperfectly, most of us did, and your body quietly cleaned up the mess before it became a problem. That is not what happens after 60. After 60, 3 things change simultaneously. And when all 3 hit at once, the math on what your body can tolerate shifts dramatically. First, your baseline inflammation rises. This is normal aging. It even has a clinical name, inflammaging. Your immune system becomes less precise. It generates low-grade background inflammation as a chronic, unfocused response. No fever, no visible swelling. But at the cellular level, your body is already running hotter than it was at 40. Any additional sources of inflammation, including what you eat, gets added on top of a baseline that's already elevated. Second, your detoxification systems slow down. Your liver processes harmful compounds more slowly. Your kidneys filter less efficiently. The oxidized byproducts of heated vegetable oils linger in your system longer than they did 2 decades ago. More time to interact with your blood vessel walls. More time to do damage. The same exposure your body handled at 45 is a meaningfully different threat at 65 or 70. Third, your arterial walls become the target. Young arterial walls are resilient. They can take some inflammatory assault and repair effectively. After 60, that repair mechanism slows. The walls become more permeable, more vulnerable to oxidized particles lodging inside them, more susceptible to the chronic, low-grade assault that, over months and years, builds the plaques that narrow your arteries and force your heart to work harder than it was ever designed to. That is the inflammatory threshold shift. Same oil, same amount, completely different consequence, because the body receiving it has changed. Keep that in your mind through every one of the 5, because they all connect back here. The oil didn't change, you did, and that changes everything. Before we get into the 5, a quick ask. Drop your name and where you're watching from in the comments. Your city, your state, your country, wherever you are. I read every single comment on this channel, every one. And the reason I ask isn't the algorithm, though I won't pretend that doesn't matter. The real reason is this. When I sit down to write these videos, I'm thinking about a specific person. Someone in their 60s or 70s, doing their best, given incomplete information, now living with the consequences of that gap. That person has a name, a kitchen with specific oils in it, a doctor they trust, or maybe one they're not so sure about anymore, a family depending on them to stay healthy. I want to know who that person is for you. Because you are not a demographic, you are not a viewer count, you are the entire reason this channel exists. And if someone comes to mind right now, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, who needs to hear what I'm about to share, pause and think about sending this to them before the video ends. What we're covering in the next 5 items is not information people stumble onto easily. That is precisely the problem. And that is exactly why we are here. The oil that calls itself Heart Healthy Meat. Gerald, 68 years old. Retired electrical engineer, Columbus, Ohio, detail-oriented by nature, the kind of man who reads every nutritional label, tracks his sodium, keeps a 15-year spreadsheet of his blood work. Gerald had a mild cardiac event at 63. A shot across the bow. So he did everything right. Lost 18 pounds, walked daily, cut out red meat. Switched from butter to canola oil because 3 separate sources told him it was the heart-healthy choice. His doctor mentioned it. A waiting room pamphlet confirmed it. The bottle said. For 5 years, Gerald cooked almost exclusively with canola. Sautéed vegetables. Roasted everything. Drizzled it over salads. At 68, he went in for follow-up imaging. Plaque in his left anterior descending artery, the widowmaker, had progressed not dramatically, measurably, consistently, in the wrong direction. His cardiologist added a second medication. Gerald sat in the parking lot and said to his wife, "I did everything they told me to do." He was right. He had, and that is exactly the problem. Here's what the research shows. Soybean, sunflower, and corn oil belong to a category called refined omega-6 dominant oil. And the evidence on what these do inside the aging cardiovascular system has shifted dramatically in the past 15 years. A landmark analysis in the British Medical Journal examined original data from the Minnesota coronary experiment, conducted in the 1960s and 70s, but never fully published at the time. When researchers finally recovered and analyzed it, the findings were striking. Participants who replaced saturated fat with vegetable oil rich in linoleic acid, the primary omega-6 fat in canola and soybean oil, did lower their cholesterol, but they did not lower their risk of dying from heart disease. For every 30-point drop in cholesterol, their risk of death increased. The cholesterol went down, the deaths went up. That is not a footnote. That is a fundamental challenge to the dietary framework most Americans over 60 were handed as medical gospel. Here's the cascade mechanism. Follow this carefully. When you heat canola or soybean oil to cooking temperatures you reach in an ordinary pan on an ordinary stovetop, something happens at the molecular level the heart healthy label doesn't mention. These oils are chemically unstable under heat, high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, multiple double bonds in their molecular structure. Those bonds are vulnerable. Heat, light, oxygen, they break, they oxidize. And when they oxidize, they produce a class of compounds called aldehydes. Aldehydes are not a minor irritant, they are directly cytotoxic to cells. Research from the University of the Basque Country found that common vegetable oils, heated to frying temperature, produced aldehyde concentrations hundreds of times higher than WHO safety limits for air quality. You're not breathing these aldehydes, you're eating them. At every meal. In a body that, as we established with the inflammatory threshold shift, is already less equipped to neutralize and clear them. Those aldehydes enter your bloodstream. They interact with LDL and oxidize it. And oxidized LDL is not the same as regular LDL. Regular LDL is a passenger. Oxidized LDL is a weapon. It's the specific form your immune system attacks, triggering the inflammatory cascade inside your arterial walls that builds plaque, stiffens vessels, narrows the channel your blood moves through, forces your heart to push harder. Every single day, with every single meal cooked in that bottle. Here's what to do instead. That's all. For low to medium heat, sautéing, eggs, light pan cooking, switch to extra virgin olive oil, predominantly monounsaturated fat, chemically stable under heat. Doesn't oxidize the way seed oils do. It also contains oleocanthal, a natural anti-inflammatory that works through the same biological pathway as ibuprofen without the side effects. Decades of Mediterranean diet for back this up without serious scientific debate. For high heat, roasting, searing, anything above 375 real butter. Not margarine. Margarine is made from the refined seed oils we're moving away from, simply hydrogenated into solid form. Real grass-fed butter, used in reasonable amounts, is a dramatically more stable and less inflammatory choice than what most Americans have been told to use for 40 years. Check your cupboard tonight. Canola, soybean, sunflower, corn oil. You don't have to throw it out tomorrow. Just stop replacing it, one bottle at a time. Gerald made that switch 8 months ago. His inflammatory markers dropped for the first time in 6 years as his cardiologist asked what he'd changed. He said, just the oil. If you're still with me, type the number 1 in the comments. It tells me this is reaching the people who need it. Because we're just getting started. Item 2 of 5, the ratio nobody told you about. Meet Dorothy. 74 years old. Retired school principal, Edinburgh, Scotland. Ran a school of 400 children without raising her voice once in 31 years. Applied that same discipline to her health. Annual checkups, medications at the same time every morning. A diet she genuinely believed was balanced. Dorothy didn't fry food. She was proud of that. She used what she called her light oils, sunflower oil for cooking, a seed oil spread on her toast, shop-bought dressings on her vegetables, all labeled low in saturated fat, all positioned every piece of health messaging she'd ever received as the responsible choice. At 72, she began experiencing something her doctor attributed to age, fatigue that didn't respond to rest, a systemic heaviness she couldn't name, joints that ached in ways they hadn't 2 years earlier, brain fog that came and went without pattern. Her blood work came back with elevated C-reactive protein, the primary clinical marker of systemic inflammation. Her doctor prescribed a low-dose anti-inflammatory and told her this was common in women her age. Nobody asked what oils were in her kitchen. Nobody mentioned the ratio. Here's what the research shows. For most of human history, people consumed omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids in a ratio of roughly 1 to 1, sometimes 2 to 1. The human body, including the cardiovascular system and immune system, evolved inside that balance. Our inflammatory response pathways, our arterial wall maintenance systems, all of it developed in an environment where these two fats existed in near equal proportion. Today, the average adult in the US and UK consumes them in a ratio of somewhere between 15 to 1 and 20 to 1. 15 to 20 times more omega-6 than omega-3. That is not a dietary preference. That is a biological emergency that has been unfolding in slow motion for 50 years. Research published in Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy laid out the mechanism with clinical precision. Omega-6 fatty acids consumed in excess are converted by the body into pro-inflammatory signaling molecules called eicosanoids. These don't cause localized inflammation, the kind you feel when you sprain an ankle. They drive systemic inflammation. The low-grade, chronic, invisible kind that damages blood vessel walls over years and decades. The kind with a clinical name, inflammaging, and that we now understand is one of the primary accelerants of cardiovascular disease in adults who's over 60. Omega-3 fatty acids do the opposite. They convert into anti-inflammatory signaling molecules. They actively counter the damage excess omega-6 drives. When the ratio is balanced, these two systems regulate each other. When it tips to 15 or 20 to 1, where most Western adults are living right now, the pro-inflammatory signal overwhelms the anti-inflammatory one completely, chronically, without any outward symptom until the damage has been accumulating for years. The primary driver of that collapse is not meat, not dairy. It's refined seed oils, canola, soybean, sunflower, corn, which are extraordinarily high in omega-6 linoleic acid and have flooded the Western food supply since the 1970s. Dorothy wasn't eating badly by any standard she'd ever been taught. She was eating exactly as advised. And that advice had quietly tilted her omega ratio to the point where her immune system was running a continuous, low-grade inflammatory program, showing up in her blood work, her joints, her fatigue, and most critically, the walls of her arteries. Here's the cascade mechanism. The pathway from a skewed omega ratio to cardiovascular damage is not theoretical. It is documented, sequential, and entirely logical once you see it. Step 1. Excess omega-6 enters your bloodstream after every meal. Your body converts it into arachidonic acid, the raw material in flavonoids. Step 2. Those eicosanoids signal your immune system to maintain a state of low-grade systemic alert. Not enough to feel like illness. Enough to keep your vascular endothelium, the delicate single-cell lining of your arteries, in a state of chronic mild irritation. Step 3. That irritated endothelium becomes more permeable, more susceptible to oxidized LDL particles lodging inside the arterial wall. Step 4. Your immune system sends macrophages to attack those lodged particles. They consume the oxidized LDL and become what researchers call foam cells. Foam cells accumulate. They form the fatty streaks that are the earliest visible sign of atherosclerosis. Step 5. Over months and years, those fatty streaks calcify. They become plaques, the arterial channel narrows, blood pressure rises as your heart compensates. The risk of clot, rupture, heart attack, and stroke climbs silently, while you keep reaching for the sunflower oil because the label says heart healthy. That is the full cascade, bottle to bloodstream to arterial wall to plaque, every step documented, every step preventable. Here's what to do instead. 2 simultaneous moves. First, reduce the omega-6 load coming in. Replace refined seed oils with stable low omega-6 alternatives. Extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil in moderation. Not perfect foods, but they don't flood your system with the linoleic acid driving the ratio collapse. Second, increase omega-3 intake deliberately. Fatty fish 2 to 3 times per week. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring. The most bioavailable sources of the EPA and DHA your body needs to produce anti-inflammatory signaling molecules if fish isn't accessible. A high-quality fish oil supplement providing at least 1 gram of combined EPA and DHA daily has strong clinical support for reducing inflammatory markers in adults over 60. Walnuts, flaxseed, and chia seeds provide a plant-based omega-3 called ALA. The body converts ALA to EPA and DHA, but inefficiently at roughly 5 to 10%, worth including. Not a substitute for marine sources. Dorothy made these changes 14 months ago. Replaced her seed oil spread with real butter, switched to extra virgin olive oil. Added sardines twice a week and a daily fish oil capsule. At her most recent checkup, her C-reactive protein had returned to normal range for the first time in 4 years. Fatigue lifted, joint pain significantly reduced. Her doctor told her whatever she was doing, keep doing it. She handed him a 1-page summary of the omega ratio research and asked why no one had mentioned it sooner. He didn't have a good answer. If you're still here, type the number 2 in the comments. Items 3, 4, and 5 get more specific, more actionable, and for many of you, more personally relevant than anything we've covered so far. Stay with me. Item 3 of 5, the thing happening in your pan right now. Meet Robert, 72 years old, retired firefighter, Portland, Oregon. Built like a man who spent 30 years carrying people out of burning buildings. Robert had a healthy relationship with risk. He knew what danger looked like. He'd learned to read a room, a building, a situation. What he couldn't read was his frying pan. Robert prided himself on cooking at home. Real meals, real ingredients, chicken, vegetables, the occasional steak. He used a large bottle of vegetable oil bought in bulk, economical, and as far as he knew, fine. He cooked on high heat, always had. He liked the sear, the crispness, the way a properly hot pan locked in the flavor. At 70, recurring headaches his doctor attributed to blood pressure fluctuations. At 71, a stress test flagged irregularities his cardiologist wanted to monitor. At 72, sitting across from that cardiologist, Robert was told his arterial inflammation markers were among the highest his doctor had seen in a patient without an active diagnosis. Never smoked. Not overweight. Exercised regularly. More tests. Adjusted medications. Nobody asked about the heat setting on his stove. Here's what the research shows. We've established that refined seed oils oxidize under heat, producing aldehydes toxic to cells, inflammatory to arterial walls. But there's a dimension to this story most people have never heard, and it changes the nature of the risk entirely. The damage isn't just chemical. It's visible. And it's happening in your kitchen right now, every time that pan gets hot. Research at De Montfort University in Leicester, led by Professor Martin Grootveld, measured the specific compounds produced when common cooking oils were heated to typical frying temperatures. The results were published, and then largely ignored by mainstream nutritional guidance. When vegetable oils high in polyunsaturated fats, sunflower, corn, soybean, canola, were heated to temperatures routinely reached in home cooking, they produced aldehydes at concentrations dramatically exceeding safe exposure limits. Specifically 4-hydroxynonenal known as 4-HNE, and malondialdehyde known as MDA. These are not obscure biochemical footnotes. 4-HNE has been studied extensively in the context of cardiovascular disease. It modifies LDL cholesterol, converting it into the oxidized form that triggers arterial plaque formation. It damages mitochondrial function in cardiac cells. It has been found in elevated concentrations in the arterial plaques of patients with advanced atherosclerosis, and it is generated in your kitchen every time you cook on high heat with a polyunsaturated oil. Professor Grootveld's team found that a single portion of French fries cooked in vegetable oil contained aldehyde levels 100 times higher than the WHO's recommended safe daily limit, 100 times, in a single serving. Here's the cascade mechanism. You heat the pan. Add the vegetable oil. It reaches cooking temperature 350 to 415 Fahrenheit for typical home cooking. The polyunsaturated fatty acid chains begin breaking apart at their double bonds. They react with oxygen. They produce aldehydes, particularly 4-HNE and MDA, which volatilize into the cooking fumes and remain dissolved in the oil itself. You cook your food in that oil. The food absorbs it, you eat it. The aldehydes enter your digestive system and pass into your bloodstream. In a younger body, antioxidant systems, particularly glutathione, neutralize a meaningful portion before they cause damage. In a body over 60, glutathione production has declined by as much as 30 to 40% compared to young adulthood. The neutralization is incomplete. A larger proportion of those aldehydes reach their targets intact. Those targets, your LDL cholesterol particles, which they oxidize. Your endothelial cells, the lining of your arteries, which they damage directly. Your cardiac muscle cells, whose mitochondria they impair, reducing the efficiency of your heart's own energy production at the cellular level. Every high-heat meal cooked in vegetable oil adds another layer, not dramatically, not in a way you feel, but measurably, cumulatively, over the months and years that make up a life. Robert was cooking 3 meals a day, most on high heat in bulk vegetable oil for years. Not the only cause of his arterial inflammation, but a daily consistent invisible contributor that nobody, not his GP, not his cardiologist, not the wholesale store had ever mentioned. Here's what to do instead. 3 rules for the pan. Simple enough to implement tonight. Rule 1, match the oil to the heat. Anything above 375 Fahrenheit, including searsink roasties, stir-frying, use avocado oil. Smoke point of approximately 500, high in monounsaturated fat, chemically stable under heat. Does not produce meaningful aldehyde concentrations at cooking temperatures. From a chemistry standpoint, one of the safest high-heat cooking oils available. Real butter works for medium-high heat, up to around 300 Fahrenheit before it begins to brown. Clarified butter or ghee with milk solids removed is stable up to 450 Fahrenheit. An excellent high-heat option with none of the oxidation risk of seed oils. Rule 2, never reuse oil. Every time a polyunsaturated oil is heated, the aldehyde concentration in what remains increases. Restaurants reusing frying oil are producing food with exponentially higher aldehyde loads. At home, pour off and discard used vegetable oil. Another reason to switch to stable fats that don't degrade the same way under repeated heat. Rule 3, ventilate. Even with stable oils, high heat produces some oxidative byproducts. Run your exhaust fan during cooking. Open a window when you can. The compounds produced aren't only in your food, they're in the air above your pan. You're breathing them during every meal you prepare. This matters more in smaller kitchens. And it matters more after 60, when your respiratory and detoxification systems are less efficient at clearing airborne toxins. Robert replaced his bulk vegetable oil with avocado oil for high heat, extra virgin olive oil for everything else. Started running the exhaust fan. Lowered his heat slightly, enough to cook well. Not so high the oil smoked before the food hit the pan. 3 months later, his blood pressure had stabilized enough that his cardiologist reduced one of his medications by half. His arterial inflammation markers dropped at the next blood draw. Margaret told him the food tasted better too. He said he thought she was just being kind. She was not. Type the number 3 in the comments if this is landing the way I hope it is. Because items 4 and 5 go somewhere most videos on this topic never reach. Item 4 is about what these oils are doing to your brain, not just your heart. And item 5 is the one I almost didn't include. It involves a name almost everyone watching will recognize. And the truth about it is genuinely uncomfortable. Stay with me. Item 4 of 5, the oil-brain connection. They are not talking about. Meet Patricia. 76 years old, retired pediatric nurse, Birmingham, England, 42 years in clinical practice. The kind of woman who held frightened parents' hands at 3 a.m. and knew exactly what to say, sharp, present, emotionally precise in a way only decades of human contact produces. At 73, Patricia's daughter noticed something, not dramatic, no single moment. More like a dimming. A word lost mid-sentence, waved away with a laugh. Walking into a room and standing there momentarily untethered. Recounting a story told 20 minutes earlier with complete sincerity. No awareness of the repetition. Patricia attributed it to tiredness. then age. Then when her daughter finally insisted on an appointment to stress, her GP ran a cognitive screening. Results came back borderline. Not diagnosable, not dismissible. Follow-up scheduled for 6 months. Stay mentally active, her doctor said. Crosswords, reading, social engagement. Nobody asked what Patricia was cooking with. Nobody mentioned that the same inflammatory process destroying arterial walls in the cardiovascular system operates by identical mechanisms in the small vessels supplying blood to the brain. Nobody connected the bottle on her kitchen counter to the dimming her daughter had noticed over 3 years. Here's what the research shows. The brain is approximately 60% fat by weight, the most fat-dense organ in the human body, and unlike muscle or liver tissue, the brain cannot easily replace or repair damaged fatty structures. The lipid composition of your brain, the specific types of fat embedded in your neuronal membranes, directly determines how efficiently those neurons fire, communicate, and maintain their structural integrity over time. This matters enormously, because the fats you eat don't stay in your bloodstream. They are incorporated into your cell membranes throughout your body, including your brain. Research published in Nutritional Neuroscience examined the relationship between dietary omega-6 to omega-3 ratios and cognitive function in adults over 65. The findings were consistent with a growing body of literature pointing in the same direction. Elevated omega-6 consumption relative to omega-3 was associated with significantly higher rates of cognitive decline across multiple domains: memory, processing speed, executive function. The mechanism is not separate from what we've already discussed. It is the same mechanism operating in a different organ. Excess of SOMA6 drives chronic systemic inflammation. That inflammation doesn't stop at the neck. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It activates the brain's resident immune cells, called microglia, which enter a pro-inflammatory state. Chronically activated microglia don't just fight infection. They begin damaging the neuronal tissue they're supposed to protect. They impair synaptic function. They reduce the brain's ability to clear metabolic waste, including the amyloid proteins whose accumulation is associated with Alzheimer's disease. A landmark study from UCLA found that animals fed diets high in refined fructose and omega-6 vegetable oils showed measurable impairment in synaptic plasticity, the brain's ability to form and strengthen connections, along significant cognitive deficits. When omega-3 supplementation was added to counter the omega-6 load, the cognitive deficits were substantially reversed. The brain is not a separate system. It is downstream of the same inflammatory environment your cardiovascular system is living in, and the oils you cook with are shaping that environment. 3 times a day, every day, in ways that don't show up on a standard blood panel until the damage is already years in the making. Here's the cascade mechanism. Step 1. Refined seed oils flood your system with omega-6 linoleic acid. Your liver converts a portion into arachidonic acid, the precursor to pro-inflammatory eicosanoids, the same signaling molecules driving vascular inflammation throughout your body. Step 2. Those eicosanoids cross the blood-brain barrier. They activate microglia into a chronic low-grade inflammatory state. In a younger brain, this activation is transient. The system self-regulates. In a brain over 65 with declining antioxidant capacity and slower cellular repair, that activation becomes persistent. Step 3. Chronically activated microglia begin releasing inflammatory cytokines, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin-1 beta, interleukin-6. These impair the function of synapses, the junctions between neurons where communication happens. Synaptic efficiency drops. Neural transmission slows. Step 4. Simultaneously, the small blood vessels supplying the brain's white matter are experiencing the same oxidized LDL-driven arterial damage we covered in items 1 and 2. Those vessels narrow. Blood flow to critical regions becomes less consistent. Neurons in oxygen-sensitive areas, particularly the hippocampus, which governs memory formation, begin functioning below their optimal threshold. Step 5. The brain's glymphatic system, the waste clearance mechanism operating primarily during deep sleep, becomes less efficient in an inflammatory environment. Metabolic waste, including amyloid beta proteins, accumulates faster than it clears. The conditions predisposing the aging brain to neurodegenerative disease are quietly established, not by genetics alone, not by fate, but by the chronic inflammatory load building meal by meal, year by year. Patricia was not experiencing inevitable aging. She was experiencing the neurological expression of the same inflammatory cascade, simultaneously narrowing her arteries and elevating her cardiovascular risk markers. Same bottle, same mechanism, 2 organs, decades in the making. Here's what to do instead. The brain protective intervention mirrors what we've already established, with 2 additions specifically supported by neurological research. First, make the oil switch we've already covered. Replace refined seed oils with extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil, and real butter. This reduces the omega-6 load driving neuroinflammation. It is the foundation, everything else builds on it. Second, prioritize DHA specifically. Of the 2 primary marine omega-3s, EPA is DHA that is most heavily concentrated in brain tissue. DHA makes up approximately 97% of the omega-3 fat in the brain. It is structural, incorporated directly into neuronal membranes. essential for maintaining their fluidity and function. As dietary omega-6 arcs out to omega-3, DHA levels in brain tissue decline, and that decline correlates with cognitive aging in multiple large population studies. Fatty fish 2 to 3 times per week provides meaningful DHA, salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring. If supplementing, look for a fish oil product that lists DHA content separately, at least 500 to 1,000 milligrams of DHA daily. Algae-based DHA supplements, derived from the same marine algae fish consume, are an effective alternative for those who don't eat fish, and the form used in most clinical research on cognitive outcomes. Third, add extra virgin olive oil deliberately, not just as a cooking substitute. Research from Temple University School of Medicine found that oleocanthal, the anti-inflammatory compound in high-quality extra virgin olive oil, may help maintain the blood-brain barrier's integrity and support the brain's glymphatic clearance of amyloid proteins. The key word is high quality. Dark glass bottle, harvest date, not just a best before date, single origin. The oleocanthal content varies enormously between products. Most mass-market olive oils contain far less than the amounts used in research. A good extra virgin olive oil should produce a mild peppery burn at the back of your throat when consumed raw. That sensation is the oleocanthal. It is a feature, not a flaw. Patricia made these changes 17 months ago. Fish twice a week, DHA supplement, olive oil switch. Every seed oil eliminated from her kitchen. At her 6-month cognitive follow-up, her scores hadn't declined. They had improved modestly, but measurably across 2 of the 4 domains tested. Her GP told her this was unusual, that cognitive scores in this range typically plateau or decline over 6 months. Patricia told him she'd changed what she was cooking with. He wrote it in her notes, then looked up the research she mentioned, then went home and checked his own cupboard. Type the number 4 in the comments if you're still here. Because item 5 is the one I told you about at the beginning. The familiar name. The uncomfortable truth. This is the one most people share after this video ends. This is the one I almost didn't include. We're almost there. Item 5 of 5. The name on the label that you could trust. Meet Thomas. Everyone called him Thomas. Not a title, a nickname. 12 years on his local city council in Savannah, Georgia. 77 years old, retired civil servant. The kind of man who read every document placed in front of him before signing it. Meticulous. Skeptical of easy answers. Thomas had a heart attack at 69. Survivable. His cardiologist called it a wake-up call. Thomas received it as exactly that. Overhauled his diet completely. Hired a nutritionist. Read books. Ask questions at every appointment. His nutritionist recommended a specific product. One Thomas had seen advertised during the evening news. One his cardiologist hadn't discouraged. One whose label listed prominently the words clinically proven and heart healthy and recommended by leading health organizations. A plant-based spread, made primarily from refined vegetable oils, canola and sunflower, processed to achieve a butter-like consistency, with added plant sterols. Marketed specifically to adults with elevated cardiovascular risks. Thomas used it every single day for 7 years. Toast in the morning. Melted over vegetables at dinner. Stirred into his oatmeal because the plant sterols would help manage his cholesterol. His LDL did go down measurably. His cardiologist was pleased. At 76, Thomas experienced a second cardiac event, more serious than the first. Lying in that hospital bed, Thomas did what Thomas always did. He started reading, and what he found made the meticulous, never sign without checking retired city councilman genuinely angry. Here's what the research shows. Plant sterol-enriched spreads do lower LDL cholesterol, documented, real, not in dispute. The mechanism is straightforward. Plant sterols compete with dietary cholesterol for absorption in the gut, reducing the amount entering the bloodstream. Here's what the marketing doesn't mention. First, the base. These spreads are manufactured from the same refined seed oils we've spent this entire video examining. Turning liquid vegetable oil into a solid spread requires either partial hydrogenation, which produces trans fats, or intrasterification, a newer process that rearranges fatty acid chains to achieve solidity without traditional trans fats. The intrasterified fats produced are structurally novel. They did not exist in the human food supply before the 20th century. And the long-term cardiovascular research on intrasterified fats in aging populations is, to use a precise clinical word, incomplete. A study published in Nutrition and Metabolism found that intrasterified fats raised fasting blood glucose and depressed HDL cholesterol, the protective form, while the trans fat control in the same study did not produce these specific effects. The implications for diabetic and pre-diabetic adults over 60, already managing insulin sensitivity, are significant, and largely undiscussed in the marketing materials of any plant spread currently on the market. Second, the plant sterol question. Plant sterols do lower LDL, but a growing body of research has raised questions about whether plant sterol supplementation at the levels provided by daily consumption of these spreads actually produces cardiovascular benefit beyond the cholesterol number itself. A meta-analysis published in the European Heart Journal found no significant reduction in cardiovascular events in patients consuming plant sterol-enriched foods despite consistent LDL lowering. The cholesterol went down, the outcomes did not clearly improve. Same pattern as Gerald in item 1. The number moves in the right direction. The patient continues to deteriorate because LDL cholesterol is a marker. It is not the disease. And when interventions are optimized to move the marker without addressing the underlying inflammatory environment, the oxidized fats, the omega ratio collapse, the aldehyde exposure we've mapped across items 1 through 4, the marker improvement becomes a dangerous distraction. A reassuring number on a blood test that allows both patient and physician to feel the situation is managed while the actual pathology continues, unchecked. Third, the endorsements. The health organization logos displayed on these products are in many cases provided through formal partnership arrangements with the food manufacturers. The criteria for earning a heart-healthy designation vary by organization and country. In several cases, they are based primarily on saturated fat content and LDL effect, without accounting for the inflammatory profile of the base oils, the processing methods used to achieve spreadable consistency, or the long-term cardiovascular event data that does not clearly support the marketing claims. Thomas read the partnership disclosures, then read the underlying research those endorsements were based on, then sat in his hospital bed and thought about 7 years of daily use. Here's the cascade mechanism. This one operates on 2 levels simultaneously. That's what makes it particularly damaging for adults over 60. Level 1 is biochemical and mirrors everything we've established. The refined seed oil base continues to drive the omega-6 load, the oxidative stress, the aldehyde exposure, and the inflammatory cascade we've traced through items 1 through 4. The plant sterols don't counteract this. They address cholesterol absorption in the gut. They do not address what the oil base is doing to your arterial walls, your neuroinflammatory environment, or your cellular detoxification systems. Level 2 is psychological. And this is the one that genuinely concerns me. When a product carries a trusted health organization's endorsement, recommended by your nutritionist, not discouraged by your cardiologist, producing the specific number improvement your doctor checks at every appointment, you stop questioning it. You feel managed. You feel compliant. You feel like you're doing the right thing. That sense of security is not protective. In Thomas's case, it was actively harmful. It foreclosed the inquiry that might have led him, years earlier, to the information we're covering today. The most dangerous health products are not the ones that obviously harm you. They are the ones that produce a visible metric of improvement, while the underlying damage continues invisibly. They satisfy the proxy while the actual goal recedes. Thomas understood this better than most. He'd spent 12 years in government watching exactly this dynamic play out in policy. A visible statistic improving while the underlying problem worsened. He recognized it immediately when he finally saw it in his own medical history. He was furious, and then he was practical. Because that is who Thomas is. Here's what to do instead. Real butter, in reasonable amounts, from grass-fed cows where available. The saturated fat in real butter does raise LDL modestly in most people. However, the specific particles raised are predominantly large, buoyant LDL. The form current research associates with significantly lower cardiovascular risk than the small, dense LDL particles that refined seed oils and processed spreads produce. The LDL number goes up slightly. The risk profile of those particles improves. This nuance doesn't fit on a label, rarely explained in a standard appointment. But it is in the research, and it matters. For those who can't tolerate dairy, avocado is whole food. Monounsaturated fat dominant. No processing, no intraesterified fatty acids, no partnership arrangements with health organizations. Slice it, mash it, spread it. For cooking applications, refer back to the 3 rules from item 3. Avocado oil for high heat. Extra virgin olive oil for medium heat and raw applications. Real butter or ghee for medium high. The spread was never the right tool for this job. Thomas discharged from hospital 14 months ago. Replaced his plant-based spread with real butter. A decision his cardiologist initially questioned and then, when Thomas presented the research, agreed to monitor rather than discourage. At his most recent follow-up, his LDL had risen slightly. His oxidized LDL had dropped. His C-reactive protein had fallen to the lowest level recorded in his entire medical history. His cardiologist stared at the numbers for a long moment, then said something Thomas will probably remember for the rest of his life. "I think we've been measuring the wrong things." Thomas told him he'd been saying that about government for 40 years. Turns out medicine is not so different. Type the number 5 in the comments if you made it here. All 5 items. The oil that calls itself heart healthy. The ratio nobody told you about. The thing happening in your pan right now. The oil-brain connection they're not talking about. And the name on the label you thought you could trust. 5 doors. 1 room. Chronic inflammation. Driven by what's sitting in your kitchen right now. We're almost done. But the most important part is still ahead. Because knowing is not enough. What comes next is what you actually do with it. I promised you something you could use. Not a list of frightening facts to carry out of this video and set down somewhere and never return to. Not information that makes you feel worse without giving you a clear path forward. A tool, specific, portable, yours to keep. Here it is. Every time you stand in a grocery store aisle, open a kitchen cupboard, or a product is placed in front of you with a health claim on the label, have these 5 questions ready. Write them down, put them in your phone, tape them inside a cabinet if that's what it takes. Not designed to make you paranoid, designed to make you precise. There's a significant difference. Question 1. What is the primary fat in this product, and is it polyunsaturated? This is your first filter. Polyunsaturated fats, found predominantly in canola, soybean, sunflower, and corn oils, are the chemically unstable fats that oxidize under heat, drive the omega ratio imbalance, and produce the aldehyde compounds we've traced through every item in this video. If the primary fat is a refined polyunsaturated seed oil, everything else on the label becomes secondary. Why this question matters. The front of a label can say heart healthy, light natural, or clinically proven. None of those words tell you what's actually in the bottle. The ingredient list does. The nutrition panel does. Train yourself to go there first, before the marketing language has a chance to frame your interpretation. Question 2. Has this oil or fat been heated, processed, or refined before it reached me? Extra virgin olive oil is pressed from olives with minimal processing and low heat. Refined olive oil, often labeled simply as olive oil without the extra virgin designation, has been processed with heat and chemical solvents that strip away the very polyphenols, including oleocanthal, that give it its anti-inflammatory properties. The name is nearly identical. The product is meaningfully different. Same distinction applies across the category. Cold-pressed avocado oil versus refined. Unrefined coconut oil versus refined. The processing is where much of the damage happens, before the product ever reaches your pan. And it's almost never disclosed prominently on the front label. Why this question matters. What you're trying to avoid is not fat. Fat is essential. What you're trying to avoid is oxidized, processed, chemically altered fat. The kind your body over 60 cannot neutralize effectively, and that drives the inflammatory cascade we've spent this entire video mapping. Question 3. What health claim is being made, and what is it actually based on? This requires a moment of deliberate skepticism, not cynicism, skepticism. There's a difference. Cynicism dismisses everything. Skepticism asks for the mechanism. When a label says heart healthy, healthy by LDL reduction, as we've seen with Gerald and Thomas, LDL reduction does not automatically translate to reduced cardiovascular events. When a label says clinically proven, proven to do what? In which population, over what time period, and who funded the study? These are not radical questions. They are the questions any good physician asks when evaluating a new treatment. You are entitled to ask them about your food. Why this question matters. The gap between what a health claim technically asserts and what a reasonable person understands it to mean is where most of the confusion in nutritional science lies. Closing that gap, even partially, changes the decisions you make at every meal. Question 4. How will I be cooking with this, and is this fat stable at that temperature? Match the fat to the application. Raw, dressings, dips, drizzling over finished dishes, almost any quality fat works here. Extra virgin olive oil is ideal. High-quality walnut oil has excellent omega-3 content for raw use. Flaxseed oil, the highest content of any culinary oil, should only ever be used raw and stored in the refrigerator. It oxidizes rapidly, low to medium heat. Sautéing, gentle pan cooking. Eggs, extra virgin olive oil. Real butter. Coconut oil is stable but flavored, suits some, not others. High heat, roasting above 375. Stir frying. Avocado oil, ghee or clarified butter. Neither produces significant aldehyde concentrations at temperatures reached in normal home cooking. Never use canola, sunflower, corn, or soybean oil for any heat application. If you have these in your kitchen currently, use them for non-consumable purposes, or discard them when they run out and do not replace them. Why this question matters. The same fat can be relatively benign at room temperature and genuinely harmful at high heat. The oil is not the only variable, the temperature is. Getting this pairing right eliminates one of the most consistent and overlooked sources of daily inflammatory exposure in the Western diet. Question 5. What is my omega-3 source today? This is the question most people never ask. Because most people are not deficient in omega-6. The Western food supply provides omega-6 in quantities that make deficiency essentially impossible. What most people over 60 are deficient in, consistently, measurably, with direct consequences for cardiovascular and cognitive health, is omega-3. Ask this at the start of every day, not as a burden. As I eat fatty fish today, salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, anchovies. 2 to 3 servings per week is the evidence-based target. If today isn't a fish day, have I taken my DHA supplement? If I haven't started supplementing, is that something I'm willing to consider given what I now understand about the ratio? The daily audit doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be honest, because the omega ratio doesn't shift in a single meal. It shifts over weeks and months of consistent daily choices. And it shifts back measurably, in the direction of reduced inflammation and improved cardiovascular and cognitive markers, with the same consistency applied in the other direction. Why this question matters. You cannot out-supplement a diet still dominated by refined seed oils. But you also cannot adequately address the ratio collapse by simply removing omega-6 without actively restoring omega-3. Both moves are required. This question ensures you're making the second one every single day. Any physician who takes nutrition seriously will welcome these questions at your next appointment. Bring them written down. Ask them plainly. The conversation that follows will tell you something important, not just about your oils, but about whether your medical team is current on the evidence. If your doctor dismisses these questions without engagement, that is not a reason to feel embarrassed for asking. It is information about whether that appointment structure is giving you everything you need, and whether seeking a second perspective from a functional medicine physician, a registered dietitian current on lipid research, or an integrative cardiologist might serve you better. You are not being difficult when you ask informed questions about what you put in your body. 3 times a day, you are being exactly what every patient should be, a participant in your own care, not a recipient of it. 5 questions. 1 for the label, 1 for the processing, 1 for the health claim, 1 for the omega-3. That is your protocol. It fits in your phone. It goes with you to the grocery store. It walks into every medical appointment in your back pocket. Use it. Refine it. Make it yours. Because the information in this video is only as valuable as what you do with it. The next time you open a kitchen cupboard, stand in a grocery aisle, or sit across from a doctor with 12 minutes and a prescription pad, the protocol is the bridge between knowing and doing. And doing, consistently, imperfectly, persistently, is everything. I want to step back for a moment. We've covered a lot of ground. 5 items, 5 people, 5 mechanisms mapped from bottle to bloodstream to arterial wall to brain. A protocol with 5 questions. And I'm aware that for some of you, that's been a lot to hold. So I want to say something that has nothing to do with aldehydes or omega ratios or oxidized LDL. I want to talk about what kind of relationship you deserve to have with your own health after 60. There's a version of medicine that treats you as a collection of numbers to be managed. Your LDL, your blood pressure, your C-reactive protein, your cognitive screening score. The goal in this version is to move those numbers into acceptable ranges using the most efficient available tools, which are almost always pharmaceutical. Because pharmaceuticals are fast, measurable, and billable within a 15-minute appointment. This version of medicine is not corrupt, not malicious. It is overwhelmed, operating inside a system not designed to deliver the slow, contextual, nutritionally informed conversation that actually changes the trajectory of aging. The physicians inside it are, in the vast majority of cases, doing their genuine best within constraints they didn't choose and can't easily change. But doing their best within a broken structure is not the same as giving you everything you need. And after 60, when the decisions you make about what you eat, how you move, how you sleep, and what you put in your kitchen have compounding consequences that play out over the years remaining to you, you need more than managed numbers. You need to understand the system you're living inside. There's a different version of medicine, a different relationship between a patient and their health. One where you walk into an appointment not as a passive recipient of clinical judgment, but as an informed participant in a shared decision. Where you understand not just what your doctor is recommending, but why. What the alternatives are, what the evidence says, what questions are still genuinely open. One where you understand that a number improving on a blood test is not automatically the same thing as your health improving. That the marker is not the disease. That the goal is not a better printout from the lab. The goal is more years of genuine vitality. Walking without pain. Thinking clearly. Being present for the people who depend on you and the life you've built. One where the kitchen is understood as a clinical environment. Where what you cook with is recognized as pharmacology. Not dramatically, but in the precise sense that the compounds entering your body 3 times a day interact with your biology in ways that are measurable, consequential, and within your control. That version of medicine doesn't require a different doctor. It requires a different patient. I've watched people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s make meaningful changes in inflammatory load and see their bodies respond in ways that surprised even their physicians. Not because they were exceptional, not because they had access to anything unavailable to you, but because they decided, at a point when many people assume the trajectory is fixed, that it wasn't too late to give their biology better information. Your body is not a machine wearing out on a predetermined schedule. It is a responsive biological system constantly interpreting signals from its environment and adjusting accordingly. The signal it has been receiving from refined seed oils for decades is a signal of chronic low-grade threat, inflammation, oxidative stress. A ratio so skewed its anti-inflammatory systems cannot compensate. Change the signal, it responds, not overnight, not perfectly, not as a substitute for appropriate medical care, but measurably, consistently, in ways that show up in blood panels and imaging and cognitive assessments, and in the quieter, harder to quantify metrics, energy, clarity, the ability to be fully present in an ordinary afternoon. Gerald checked his cupboard and changed his oil. Inflammation markers dropped for the first time in 6 years. Dorothy added sardines twice a week and switched to butter. C-reactive protein returned to normal range. Robert lowered his heat and opened a window. Blood pressure stabilized enough to reduce his medication. Patricia added DHA and replaced her seed oils. Cognitive scores improved in 2 domains at 6 months. Thomas switched back to real butter and watched his oxidized LDL fall to its lowest recorded level while his cardiologist reconsidered what he'd been measuring. 5 kitchens. 5 sets of changes that cost less than a single specialist copay, no prescription, no side effects. Food that by almost universal account tasted considerably better. None of them were cured of aging. None achieved perfection. All of them moved, measurably, verifiably, in the right direction. At an age when the medical system had largely shifted its posture toward management rather than improvement. You have the right to know what's in your food. You have the right to understand the mechanism behind every health claim placed in front of you. You have the right to ask your doctor questions that go beyond the prescription pad, and to expect engagement rather than dismissal when you do. You have the right to be an active participant in the decisions that will shape the years ahead of you. And you have something Gerald and Dorothy and Robert and Patricia and Thomas didn't have when they were making their mistakes. You have this information now, today, before the second cardiac event, before the follow-up imaging, before the parking lot conversation where someone turns to their spouse and says, "I did everything they told me to do." That is not a small thing. If you use it, it is everything. The best physicians I've encountered understand something the system doesn't always reward them for saying out loud, that the most powerful interventions are almost never the most complicated ones, that the body is not looking for complexity. It's looking for the right conditions to do what it has always known how to do. Heal itself, give it those conditions. Start tonight. Not with all 5 changes at once, with one. The one that feels most urgent, most accessible, most clearly yours. The oil in your cupboard is a reasonable place to begin. If this video gave you a new way to think about what's happening inside your body after 60, and what you actually have the power to do about it, please subscribe every week. Evidence-based, honest, designed specifically for adults over 60, who deserve more than a 15-minute appointment and a prescription they were never fully explained. No supplements to sell. No program to enroll in. Just the research translated into language that respects your intelligence and your time. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because the next video covers something that connects directly to everything we discussed today. Something most people over 60 are doing every morning that is quietly working against everything their medication is trying to achieve. You won't want to miss it. Before you go, one genuine question. Has there ever been a moment in your health journey where you did everything right? Everything your doctor told you. Everything the label promised. Everything the pamphlet in the waiting room recommended. And still found yourself sitting in a specialist's office wondering how you got there. If that's been your experience, I want you to know something. You were not failing. You were working with incomplete information inside a system that didn't always give you the full picture. That is not your fault. And it is not too late to fill in the gaps. Leave your story in the comments, what you tried, what surprised you, what changed when you finally found the right information. What questions you're still carrying that nobody has answered adequately yet. Your experience is not just yours. There is someone watching this right now. Maybe someone who just received a number on a blood test that frightened them. Maybe someone whose spouse noticed something they haven't been ready to name yet. Maybe someone sitting in a waiting room on their phone trying to understand what is happening inside their own body. Who needs to read exactly what you're about to write. Yours to be the information no study can provide and no physician has time to share. It is the most human part of this conversation. Take care of yourselves.